In rock and roll, some artists become famous by capturing the spirit of their time. Meat Loaf became famous by sounding as though he had escaped from another world entirely, a world of roaring motorcycles, teenage promises, broken hearts, glowing dashboards, and doomed lovers racing toward the end of the night. He did not simply sing a song, he entered it like an actor walking onto a stage. His face twisted with every emotion, his clothes became soaked with sweat, his voice could begin as a frightened whisper, rise into a desperate plea, and finally explode into a full-throated roar. At a time when many rock stars tried to appear effortlessly cool, Meat Loaf gave the audience everything he had. There was nothing effortless about it, and that was the point. The man who would become Meat Loaf was born Marvin Lee Aday in Dallas, Texas on September 27, 1947. His mother, Wilma, was a school teacher who also sang gospel music. His father, Orvis, was a former police officer and businessman whose struggles with alcohol made home life unstable, and according to Meat Loaf's later accounts, sometimes violent. Music, church, school plays, and football gave the young Marvin places to direct his energy. He was a large boy, and the nickname that eventually became known around the world grew out of his size. Meat Loaf told more than one version of exactly how the name began. In one story, his father called him Meat, almost from birth. In another, a football coach added loaf after Marvin stepped on his foot. Whatever its precise origin, the name followed him, and he eventually transformed what might have been an insult into something unforgettable. He attended Thomas Jefferson High School in Dallas, appearing in productions such as The Music Man and Where's Charlie? For a young man who often felt out of place, acting offered a powerful discovery. On stage, being bigger, louder, and more emotional was not a weakness. It was an advantage. After high school, he briefly attended college in Texas, but the direction of his life changed in the mid-1960s. His mother died after a battle with cancer, and his relationship with his father deteriorated further. Meat Loaf later described a frightening confrontation in which his father attacked him with a knife. Not long afterward, he left Texas and headed west. Los Angeles in the late 1960s was crowded with young people trying to reinvent themselves. Marvin Aday arrived with a huge voice, a strange nickname, and no clear guarantee that either one would lead anywhere. He worked as a parking lot attendant and a nightclub bouncer while forming a band called Meat Loaf Soul. As musicians came and went, the group performed under other names including Popcorn Blizzard and Floating Circus. They opened shows for major acts of the era, but a lasting recording career remained out of reach. Then theater opened another door. Meat Loaf joined a production of Hair, the counterculture musical whose mixture of rock music and dramatic performance suited him perfectly. The show took him from Los Angeles to Detroit and eventually to New York. In Detroit, he met singer Sean Murphy, known as Stoney. Motown paired them as a duo, and in 1971 released the album Stoney and Meat Loaf on its Rare Earth label. The record did not make him a star, but it proved that the enormous man from Dallas could sing soul, rock, and blues with equal conviction. More importantly, his work in musical theater was leading him toward the collaborator who would change his life. Meat Loaf had found his instrument. Soon he would meet the writer who knew exactly how to use it. In 1973, Meat Loaf auditioned for a public theater musical called More Than You Deserve. Its composer was Jim Steinman, a young songwriter whose imagination seemed built from equal parts rock and roll, classical drama, teenage fantasy, and gothic romance. Steinman did not write ordinary 3-minute songs. He wrote miniature epics. His characters swore eternal love, betrayed one another, fled into the night, and faced death with the radio still playing. Pianos crashed like thunderstorms. Guitars sounded like speeding engines. Every emotion was pushed beyond realism until it became myth. Meat Loaf was the ideal interpreter for that world. He could act Steinman's lyrics as completely as he sang them. The two men were very different in temperament, and their partnership would often be difficult, but artistically they completed one another. Steinman supplied the words and the grand design. Meat Loaf gave those ideas a body, a face, and a voice. During the same period, Meat Loaf joined the Los Angeles production of The Rocky Horror Show. On stage, he played both Eddie, the leather-clad delivery boy, and Dr. Everett Scott. When the musical became a film in 1975, he appeared as Eddie and tore through Hot Patootie, Bless My Soul with such force that his brief performance became one of the picture's defining moments. The Rocky Horror Picture Show was not an immediate mainstream success. It found its audience gradually through midnight screenings, where fans returned in costume, shouted responses at the screen, and turned the movie into a communal ritual. Meat Loaf would soon experience a similar slow-burning phenomenon with an album that record companies had repeatedly rejected. The earliest pieces of Bat Out of Hell had roots in Steinman's stage projects, particularly a futuristic reworking of Peter Pan called Neverland. Together, Steinman and Meat Loaf began presenting the songs to record labels. Executives heard compositions that were too long for radio, too theatrical for hard rock, too loud for Broadway, and too strange for the categories used to market popular music. Rejection followed rejection. Producer Todd Rundgren finally recognized the possibilities. Rundgren reportedly believed the project was partly a parody of Bruce Springsteen's grand streetwise sound, but he also understood the scale it required. Recording began in 1975. Rundgren played the blazing motorcycle-like guitar solo on the title track and built layers of sound around Steinman's piano-driven arrangements. The album's 7 songs created a complete emotional universe. You Took the Words Right Out of My Mouth turned a first kiss into a supernatural event. 2 Out of 3 Ain't Bad made Romantic Compromise sound devastating. Paradise by the Dashboard Light, performed with singer Ellen Foley, compressed courtship, lust, panic, and lifelong regret into an 8-minute rock and roll comedy. Baseball announcer Phil Rizzuto supplied the famous play-by-play sequence, apparently without fully understanding its double meaning. The title song was even more extreme, nearly 10 minutes of piano, guitar, drums, and fatal momentum. Steinman's doomed young writer seemed to belong in a comic book, a horror movie, and a teenage memory all at once. Meat Loaf sang the story as though he were the writer, the witness, and the crash itself. When recording was finished, the struggle continued. Major labels still did not know what to do with the album. It was eventually accepted by Cleveland International Records and distributed by Epic. Bat Out of Hell was released in October 1977. It arrived during the height of disco and the rise of punk. 2 movements that appeared to leave little room for an oversized singer performing operatic rock songs beside a grand piano. By every conventional rule, the record should have disappeared. Instead, it began one of the longest and most unlikely journeys in popular music history. Bat Out of Hell did not become a sensation overnight. American radio programmers were hesitant, and early reviews were mixed. The album's songs were difficult to shorten, impossible to categorize, and completely out of step with the fashionable sounds of 1977. Meat Loaf and Jim Steinman responded by taking the music directly to audiences. Their concerts treated every song like a climactic scene. Steinman attacked the piano. Singer Carla DeVito became Meat Loaf's dramatic partner on stage and in promotional appearances, lip-syncing Ellen Foley's part in the Paradise by the Dashboard Light video. At the center of it all was Meat Loaf, dressed in formal clothes and waving a red handkerchief, acting out desire, rejection, fury, and heartbreak under the stage lights. Television helped the public understand what radio alone could not. A filmed performance of the title track received important exposure on Britain's Old Grey Whistle test. In the United States, Meat Loaf appeared on Saturday Night Live. Viewers did not merely hear a powerful singer, they saw a character unlike anyone else in popular music. The album gathered momentum one listener at a time. It became especially successful in Britain and Australia, while its American audience continued to grow. 2 Out of 3 Ain't Bad reached the top 40 in the United States, but the true story was the album itself. Bat Out of Hell remained in stores, on the charts, and in family record collections year after year. Eventually, it sold tens of millions of copies and became one of the best-selling albums ever recorded. Its success came from more than spectacle. Beneath the motorcycles and thunder was a recognizable emotional truth. Steinman wrote about adolescence as adults remember it, not as a modest period of awkward growth, but as a time when every promise feels eternal and every rejection feels like death. Meat Loaf never stood outside those feelings and winked at the audience. However outrageous the material became, he performed it with absolute sincerity. But turning that sincerity into a live spectacle, night after night, carried a terrible cost. The Bat Out of Hell tour was physically punishing. Meat Loaf threw himself across stages, dropped to his knees, and pushed his voice to its limits. During a concert in Ottawa in 1978, he injured his leg after leaping from the stage, then continued touring in a wheelchair. The pressure was psychological as well as physical. Meat Loaf had spent years fighting to make the record, only to discover that success created new demands faster than he could meet them. He was expected to repeat a phenomenon that had never followed a formula in the first place. His relationship with Steinman grew strained amid business disputes, exhaustion, and conflicting expectations. Work began on a follow-up, but Meat Loaf's voice failed him. Whether the central cause was physical damage, emotional collapse, or a combination of both, he found himself unable to sing as he had had before. Steinman ultimately recorded the planned material himself and released Bad for Good in 1981. For Meat Loaf, the loss of his voice struck at the center of his identity. Only a few years earlier, he had been a struggling actor and singer, carrying a nickname from childhood. Now his debut solo album was becoming a permanent part of rock culture, and he was unsure whether he could make another one. He remained active as an actor, taking the leading role of Travis Redfish in the 1980 musical comedy Roadie. The part allowed him to rely on the dramatic abilities that had always been inseparable from his singing, but the film failed to become a major hit, and the shadow of Bat Out of Hell remained enormous. His singing voice gradually returned. In 1981, he released Dead Ringer, an album written by Steinman and featuring the title duet with Cher. The record reached #1 in Britain, proving that a substantial audience was still waiting for him. Yet behind that success, the partnership that had created Bat Out of Hell was breaking apart, and Meat Loaf was entering the most difficult decade of his career. The 1980s tested Meat Loaf's ability to survive without the perfect alignment of people and circumstances that had created Bat Out of Hell. His next album, Midnight at the Lost and Found, appeared in 1983 without songs by Jim Steinman. It failed to recreate the earlier magic. At the same time, Meat Loaf faced lawsuits, management problems, and disputes over money. Although he had performed on one of the best-selling records in history, he said that much of the fortune people assumed he possessed never reached him. In 1983, he filed for personal bankruptcy. There were also battles with his own health and confidence. The demands of fame had contributed to depression, substance abuse, and severe strain on his voice. For a performer whose identity depended on appearing indestructible, admitting vulnerability did not come easily. Still, he kept working. Bad Attitude followed in 1984 and Blind Before I Stop in 1986. Neither restored his American superstardom, but Meat Loaf remained a formidable concert attraction, particularly in Europe. Audiences in Britain, Germany, and other countries never abandoned him. Touring became both a lifeline and an act of defiance. If the American record business viewed him as a survivor of the previous decade, he could still walk onto a stage and prove that the music was alive. His concerts were built on a principle he had learned in the theater. A performer does not merely reproduce a recording, he creates a dramatic event in the room. Songs changed shape from night to night. Duets became arguments between characters. He treated the audience as part of the scene, using gesture, timing, and facial expression as carefully as pitch. Acting also gave him a second career that was more substantial than a series of rock star cameos. Meat Loaf understood character roles because he had spent his entire musical life becoming a character. Directors could use his size and intensity to suggest danger, then reveal humor, fear, or tenderness underneath. He appeared in films and television throughout the 80s and early 90s, gradually building a screen resume alongside his recordings. At home, his life had changed as well. Meat Loaf married Leslie Edmonds in 1979 and adopted her daughter Pearl, who later became a singer. Their daughter Amanda was born in 1981 and later pursued acting. Away from the stage, Meat Loaf coached youth baseball and softball. The image was far removed from the doomed writers and desperate lovers of his records. One of rock's most theatrical stars, standing beside a community ball field, focused on his children and their teammates. In 1984, he legally changed his first name from Marvin to Michael, distancing himself from a name that had become associated with painful childhood ridicule. To the public, however, he remained Meat Loaf, a name he had turned into an identity no one could confuse with another performer. By the end of the 80s, the usual machinery of pop culture had moved on. A conventional career forecast would have offered little reason to expect Meat Loaf to dominate the charts again. But Meat Loaf's career had never been conventional. Bad Out of Hell continued to sell. New listeners kept discovering it, and longtime fans still wanted the kind of emotional excess that only Meat Loaf and Jim Steinman could deliver together. Around 1990, the two men reunited to begin a sequel. The decision carried enormous risk. Naming the album Bad Out of Hell 2 invited direct comparison with a record that had grown from a successful release into a legend. More than a decade of disappointments would be measured against it. If the sequel failed, it could make the original look like an accident. Instead of avoiding that pressure, Meat Loaf and Steinman embraced it. The new album would be louder, longer, stranger, and more unapologetically theatrical than contemporary fashion advised. It would not pretend that the years between had never happened. It would present Meat Loaf not as a young newcomer, but as a battered romantic returning from exile. In 1993, 16 years after the first album, the motorcycle roared back to life. I'd do anything for love, but I won't do that. The full album version stretched past 12 minutes. It began with a quiet piano, built through crashing guitars and enormous choruses, and ended as a dramatic duet. The song seemed defiantly unsuited to the early 1990s. Grunge and alternative rock were dismantling the polished excess of the previous decade. Yet Meat Loaf returned with a composition that treated restraint as the enemy, and the public embraced it. The single reached #1 across the world, including the United States and Britain. In the United Kingdom, it remained at #1 for 7 weeks. Its gothic music video, directed by Michael Bay, presented Meat Loaf as a romantic monster inside a dreamlike castle. The female voice on the recording belonged to English singer Lorraine Crosby, while Patti Russo became Meat Loaf's principal duet partner in concerts and on later recordings. In 1994, I'd Do Anything for Love earned Meat Loaf the Grammy Award for Best Male Rock Vocal Performance. The victory was more than a successful comeback. It was a reversal dramatic enough to belong in a Steinman song. The singer who had lost his voice, declared bankruptcy, and spent years dismissed as a relic had returned with the biggest hit of his life. Its success introduced Meat Loaf to a generation that had not been present for the original album. Songs such as Rock and Roll Dreams Come Through and Objects in the Rearview Mirror May Appear Closer Than They Are expanded the familiar world of memory, desire, and lost youth. Meat Loaf's older face only deepened the material. He no longer seemed merely to be singing about teenage dreams. He sounded like a man confronting what those dreams had cost. He followed the comeback with Welcome to the Neighborhood in 1995. The album included I'd Lie for You and That's the Truth, another sweeping romantic single, and demonstrated that the renewed audience extended beyond one reunion record. During these years, Meat Loaf also became increasingly familiar as an actor. He appeared as Tiny, a bouncer in Wayne's World, as the Spice Girls bus driver in Spice World, and opposite Patrick Swayze in Black Dog. His most memorable later role came in David Fincher's Fight Club in 1999. As Robert Paulson, Meat Loaf played a former bodybuilder who joins a support group after illness has transformed his body. The role could easily have been treated as a joke, but Meat Loaf gave Robert warmth and wounded dignity. When the character's fate becomes a turning point in the story, the audience feels the loss because Meat Loaf made him human. The film's repeated use of Robert Paulson's name gave Meat Loaf another strange form of immortality within popular culture. His screen work revealed something that his best music had always contained. The size of his performances could attract attention, but vulnerability gave them meaning. Meat Loaf's first marriage ended in 2001. He later married Deborah Gillespie in 2007. Through personal changes, new tours, and an expanding catalog, he remained closely associated with the Bat Out of Hell world, but the bond with Steinman remained complicated, and creating a third installment would prove far less straightforward than the triumphant seconds. The 1998 collection, The Very Best of Meat Loaf, did more than summarize his career. It included new recordings of Steinman material, among them Is Nothing Sacred and Home by Now, No Matter What. A VH1 Storytellers album and video followed, allowing Meat Loaf to explain the characters and ideas behind his songs in a more intimate setting. Even stripped of the largest arena effects, he approached the music as theater. In 2003, after an 8-year gap between studio albums, he released Couldn't Have Said It Better. This time, the challenge was to create Meat Loaf music without relying on Steinman as the principal writer. James Michael and Nikki Sixx wrote the 7-minute title song, as well as Love You Out Loud and Man of Steel. Stephen Trask, best known for Hedwig and the Angry Inch, contributed Tear Me Down, while Meat Loaf closed the album with Bob Dylan's Forever Young. The record borrowed the scale of his classic work, but used new collaborators to push his theatrical style into the 21st century. Then came the most complicated return of all. Bat Out of Hell 3, The Monster Is Loose was released in 2006, 29 years after the original. Early hopes of another complete Meat Loaf and Steinman collaboration did not materialize. Desmond Child produced the album, and disputes between the two camps over the Bat Out of Hell name briefly threatened its release. Meat Loaf later insisted that the conflict belonged more to managers and lawyers than to the hearts of the two men themselves. Steinman did not produce the record, but 7 of his compositions appeared on it. The most prominent was It's All Coming Back to Me Now, performed as a duet with Norwegian singer Marion Raven. Steinman's song was already famous through Celine Dion, but Meat Loaf reclaimed it for the gothic world from which it had come. The album also reached into heavier modern rock through its title track, while Brian May supplied guitar on Bad for Good. Bat Out of Hell 3 reached the top 10 in both the United States and Britain. It could not equal the cultural force of the first 2 albums, but it completed the trilogy on a suitably enormous scale. Meat Loaf's next studio record deliberately stepped away from the Bat mythology. Hang Cool Teddy Bear, released in 2010 and produced by Rob Cavallo, was a concept album about a wounded soldier who sees possible futures instead of reliving his past. Its large cast included Brian May, Steve Vai, Hugh Laurie, Jack Black, Patty Russo, and Meat Loaf's daughter Pearl. Rather than imitate Steinman, the record built a new cinematic story around Meat Loaf's gift for becoming a character. Hell in a Handbasket followed in 2011 and 2012, depending on the country. Produced primarily by longtime guitarist Paul Crook, it was angrier, more personal, and more concerned with the world outside romantic fantasy. Even late in his career, he was still willing to make choices no cautious legacy artist would have attempted. But while the records remained large, the body producing that voice was becoming increasingly fragile. Meat Loaf's performances had always looked physically dangerous. After losing his voice during the first Bad Out of Hell tour and breaking his leg on stage in 1978, the accumulated cost of performing without restraint became impossible to ignore. In November 2003, while touring behind Couldn't Have Said It Better, he collapsed during a concert at London's Wembley Arena. Doctors diagnosed him with Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome, a condition involving an extra electrical pathway in the heart that can cause a dangerously rapid heartbeat. He underwent a procedure to correct it, then returned to performing. In 2007, a vocal cord cyst forced him to cancel a European tour and undergo therapy. In Pittsburgh in 2011, he collapsed after struggling to breathe, but recovered enough to finish the show. 5 years later, he fell to the stage during I'd Do Anything for Love in Edmonton. His representative attributed the collapse to severe dehydration. Multiple back operations, including spinal surgery, limited his ability to walk and helped end his touring life. In 2019, he fell from a convention stage and broke his collarbone. The man who had once charged across arenas now sometimes relied on a cane or wheelchair. These changes could also be heard in his voice. It had become lower, rougher, and less flexible than the instrument that recorded Bat Out of Hell. Meat Loaf did not try to disguise that completely when he reunited with Jim Steinman's songs for Braver Than We Are in 2016. Produced by Paul Crook, the album contained only Steinman compositions, some reaching back to theatrical projects from before the first Bad album. The voice on Braver Than We Are was no longer the voice of a young man racing toward disaster. It was the voice of someone who had survived it. That gave songs such as Who Needs the Young, Speaking in Tongues, and Souvenirs, a different kind of drama. The vulnerability was no longer only part of the character, it belonged to the singer himself. At the center of the album was the 11-minute Going All the Way Is Just the Start, arranged in 6 movements like one of Steinman's classic epics. The recording brought together 3 voices inseparable from Meat Loaf's history. Ellen Foley, who had sung on the original recording of Paradise by the Dashboard Light, returned alongside Carla DeVito, who had performed the song in its famous video and on the Bat Out of Hell tour. Nearly 40 years later, the 3 singers were together at last on a studio recording. The song did not attempt to make them sound young again. It allowed time, memory, and survival to become part of the performance. Braver Than We Are became Meat Loaf's final studio album and the last album-length collaboration between his voice and Steinman's writing. Its title now sounds like a shared confession. Their songs followed frightened people making impossible vows because admitting uncertainty would hurt too much. Jim Steinman died on April 19th, 2021, at the age of 73. Meat Loaf described him as the centerpiece of his life. Their partnership had survived distance, legal battles, misunderstandings, and long periods apart because neither man's career could be fully explained without the other. Steinman's songs found their ultimate dramatic voice in Meat Loaf, and Meat Loaf found in Steinman's songs a universe large enough to contain him. Meat Loaf was still discussing another record in his final months, but on January 20th, 2022, 9 months after Steinman's death, he died at 74. His wife Deborah, daughters Pearl and Amanda, and close friends were with him. His family announced his death without publicly confirming a cause. Musicians remembered the voice and commitment. Actors remembered a generous scene partner. Fans remembered inherited albums, midnight screenings of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, arena concerts, car rides, weddings, and karaoke nights. In 2022, Britain's official charts company named Bat Out of Hell the best-selling debut album in United Kingdom history. Yet his legacy was larger than one record. He was a rock singer with a stage actor's instincts and an unlikely romantic hero who made vulnerabilities sound courageous. His greatest gift was his willingness to believe completely in emotions that other performers kept at a safe distance. He made heartbreak physical, longing theatrical, and teenage memories as immense as ancient myths. Whenever that motorcycle engine rises from the piano, whenever the drums begin to race and the guitar cuts through the darkness, Meat Loaf is young again, charging into the night, giving the song everything he has, still searching for paradise by the dashboard light.